Budget talks heated up in Albany on Monday as Governor Andrew Cuomo indicated he plans to drop some of the more controversial measures from the budget negotiations.
If this was just the budget, we'd be done. It's all the ancillary issues that are holding things up, that are the policy issues, and that's why it's very difficult this year.
The DREAM Act, which provides tuition assistance to the children of undocumented immigrants, is gone from the budget talks, as is the education tax credit, which is meant to help spur, in part, donations that help private schools.
This package situation, which the governor had success with previously, does not work anymore. We saw it with the Women's Equality Act, and now we see, again, this coupling of two very, very different issues.
A commission that would determine a pay hike for state lawmakers is also off the table, as is a proposal that would lift the cap on charter schools. All are measures that could have derailed the budget talks.
The governor, the speaker, the members of both houses, I think, recognize that having a negotiated budget is far better than the alternative. So we're working very hard at trying to make that a reality.
Still, disagreements remain. Cuomo is yet to reach a deal with Senate Republicans on the disclosure of private business clients.
We think there's serious problems for people who practice law and are other professionals, and we're trying to get something that's workable.
Cuomo must still convince the Democratic-led Assembly to take up a variety of contentious education reform proposals, which he wants included in the budget.
And I think we're just trying to, have conversation about what's most important to us. What are the things that we think we can find common ground on?
Nevertheless, with Cuomo's office indicating that the governor is willing to take some of the more controversial measures and negotiate them later on in the legislative session, makes the likelihood of an on-time budget passing before March 31st all the stronger. Reporting in Albany, Nick Reisman, Time Warner Cable News. Governor Andrew Cuomo made an unusual trip on Tuesday from his offices on the second floor of the state capitol to the third floor to personally meet with Senate Republicans about his push for ethics reform and increased disclosure of outside income.
Disclosing law clients is a sensitive area. You should also remember that this issue has plagued Albany for probably 50 years.
Cuomo did not emerge from the meeting with a deal like the one he had struck a week ago with Assembly Democrats that included disclosure of legal clients, travel per diem reform, and having corrupt officials surrender their pensions. Of those issues, Senate Republicans are most averse to the disclosure requirements.
I understand their issues. We've been talking about it now for a number of weeks. Obviously, we have an ethics agreement with the Assembly that I think establishes that it can be done.
Cuomo has said he won't back a spending plan agreement that does not include ethics legislation. For the Senate, it's the missing piece of the budget puzzle.
I think ethics reform is probably the most important issue we're going to be dealing with, and I understand that if we get it done, everything kind of flows from there.
The personal appearance by the governor at the closed-door Republican meeting comes with only 7 days to go until the budget must be approved. Already this week, contentious issues such as the DREAM Act and the Education Investment Tax Credit fell off the negotiating table.
We have no agreement. We're nowhere close to an agreement. The Assembly does not want to do the ETC, and the Senate does not want to do the DREAM Act.
State lawmakers are discussing the creation of an education reform commission that would study some policy changes like new teacher evaluation criteria. Cuomo says he's close to an agreement on education issues with Senate Republicans. However, Assembly Democrats remain skeptical.
We have had very good conversations on education, and I believe we're basically in the same place on the Senate side. The Assembly side is still discussing the issue.
Cuomo's education reform proposals have seen their strongest pushback from the state's teachers union, which has close ties to the Democratic-led Assembly. At the Capitol, Nick Reisman, Time Warner Cable News.
Protesters didn't have a shortage of words at the Capitol Thursday, but they did have a main adjective to describe the governor's education agenda: toxic.
His toxic agenda for education is not going to happen. It's wrong. It's wrong for students.
NYSET President Karen McGee and thousands of teachers, parents, and students had a list of complaints. One concern, doing more with less. Protesters accused the governor of holding school aid hostage.
We are being underfunded. We are being, marginalized.
Cuomo has proposed more than $1 billion in school aid, but that amount's contingent on whether lawmakers approve his education reforms. One of those proposed changes is an overhaul of the teacher evaluation system. The governor wants to tie evaluations more closely to standardized test scores.
I'm tired being the bane of society.
All kinds of people are coming together because they really support their teachers.
NYSUT says this rally won't be their last. They say you can expect to see them again at the $1 Million Staircase or other parts of the state in coming months.
We will continue to put pressure on the governor for the remainder of his term.
NYSUT says, though the conversation on education will continue, the time is now for legislators to stand up against the governor's proposals. The state budget deadline is on April 1st. From the newsroom, Madeline Rivera, Time Warner Cable News.
Tonight, deadline day. Lawmakers are debating and voting on the most controversial portions of the state budget, education, and ethics, and they are racing to meet the midnight deadline for this year's spending plan to be on time. We'll bring you the latest from the Capitol. We'll get updates from Assembly members Danny O'Donnell and Pat Fahey. We'll hear analysis from the insiders. It is all coming up as Capitol Tonight starts right now. Good evening and welcome to this Tuesday edition of Capitol Tonight. I'm Liz Benjamin. Well, the long, strange budget season is almost at an end. Lawmakers are right now engaged in debating the final and most controversial pieces of the deal hashed out by their respective leaders and Governor Andrew Cuomo, which deal with education and also ethics reform. We heard a lot of conflicting spin and also posturing from the legislature and the Cuomo administration over the last several days, particularly when it comes to education policy, and adding a little extra drama as legislators race to meet tonight's midnight deadline for an on-time budget is a call from the teachers union NYSUT for members to reject the education budget bill. That puts lawmakers in a rather uncomfortable position, especially the Assembly Democrats, who of course have long been close allies with NYSUT. Rejecting the education bill would mean turning down an additional $1.4 billion worth of state aid for school districts, and local officials say they desperately need that money. It would also mean tanking the ethics reform deal that took so long to hammer out between the governor and the Senate Republicans, even though, of course, it falls far short in the eyes of good government groups. Needless to say, it's a bit of a swirl down at the Capitol, and Nick Reisman is there, as he has been every day, covering it all for us. He is joining us now. He is live from the Capitol. Good evening, Nick.
Hey, good evening, Liz, and that's right. State lawmakers are trying to meet that looming midnight deadline for the passage of the 2015-16 state budget, but Governor Andrew Cuomo's controversial education reform measures are potentially making for a late-night debate.
It's not an ideal world. It's not an ideal, situation, but, people in the state want an on-time budget.
The budget includes a new teacher evaluation criteria based on a mix of state tests and classroom observation. Teachers will have to wait longer to receive tenure, which is tied to the evaluations. Poor performing teachers can be fired, regardless of tenure.
I think it certainly scales back some of the collective bargaining rights teachers have negotiated, and that's a big problem. These are due process rights that the teachers have fought for many years.
Adding to lawmakers' concerns, school districts must put the new evaluation criteria in place by November, or they won't receive a boost in education aid.
The money will go out the door, but the school districts will have to respond and get an approval from SCD by the middle of November.
The state's teachers union and the union-backed Working Families Party are urging lawmakers not to vote for the education changes.
I think it's time right now for the Assembly and the Senate to pause, not agree to the governor's draconian testing regimen, and not agree to the linkage between school aid and testing.
And clocking in at more than 300 pages, the education bill landed on lawmakers' desks Tuesday afternoon with only a few hours to review it before voting.
It's a lot to try to read today. This is a message of necessity. So I am reading as I'm talking. I'm literally carrying the bill around with me right now.
And Liz, as you mentioned at the top of the show, lawmakers in both the Senate and the Assembly are actually debating the education bill right now, which also includes that ethics reform legislation as well. But in addition to that massive education, labor, and family assistance measure, there is also a constitutional amendment that is going to be considered this evening as well that deals with pension forfeiture for public officials who are convicted of corruption. Liz?
So Nick, do you feel like putting some predictions out on the table? Do you believe that these measures will pass? I mean, I'll be talking about this a little bit later with the insiders, but there is a lot of pressure, particularly on those Assembly Democrats. And over in the Senate, the Democrats there, though they are in the minority, have been trying to get the Republicans on the record on anything with some hostile amendments, and it hasn't been working.
That's right. Well, you know, it's really interesting, Liz, because you're seeing right now in the Assembly the Democratic leadership there, Assembly Education Committee Chairwoman Kathy Nolan, defending the education bill that has been agreed to by the legislative leaders and by Governor Cuomo. Obviously, in the Senate, it's being defended by Republican Education Committee Chairman John Flanagan as well. This is not like a situation, I don't think, that we saw with, say, Tier 6, which happened several years ago when the governor wanted to create a new, less generous pension tier. I remember watching in the wee hours of the morning the then Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver whipping votes from recalcitrant lawmakers who were really not in favor of that legislation whatsoever. This time around, you know, debate started relatively early in the evening. They obviously wanted to get it out of the way as soon as possible and then vote on these other budget bills. So I think it'll pass, but not without some grumbling from state lawmakers.
Well, I know you will be there, as you have been for us throughout the week and throughout this budget season, and I thank you so much for all the time that you've put in, and I know that viewers know that they can count on you until the wee hours of the morning. Nick, thanks so much.
The finishing touches were made on the state budget in the early hours of Wednesday morning, technically making the 2015-16 state budget the first late spending plan in 5 years.
What's really occurred here is that the two majorities and the governor did not get things done in time so that everything could age properly on the desk, which is why we have messages of necessity.
Lawmakers didn't finish negotiating the complex and contentious education budget bill until Monday, and the bill wasn't printed until Tuesday afternoon. A 6-hour debate ensued in the Democratic-led Assembly. Former Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver, who faces corruption charges, has seen his fair share of late budgets over the years.
It's important as to what's in there, clearly. I mean, just to say you're on time and it not being an appropriate budget, I don't give it as much weight as I do, a substantive budget that contains what the people of the state need under the circumstances.
The budget itself includes changes to the teacher evaluation criteria, making it harder to obtain tenure and easier for school districts to fire poor-performing teachers, regardless of tenure.
The system now is basically a seniority-based education system. The assumption was the longer you're there, the better you are. So that was seniority. Now we're moving to performance.
Governor Andrew Cuomo pushed the education reform measures into the budget plan even as the state's teachers' unions pushed back hard. They accused the governor of helping the wealthy donors who contributed to his campaign, donors who also backed charter school expansion.
The teachers' union is a very powerful political force in Albany. They are probably the largest single donor to the politicians in Albany.
The budget also includes new disclosure requirements for state lawmakers with outside legal clients, measures that were introduced after Silver's arrest. But ethics watchdogs question whether the measures go far enough.
The path that he chose is a path that we think is insufficient to deal with the problem, which is lawmakers using their public office for private gain.
Lawmakers don't return here to the Capitol until April 21st, and when they do, they'll be facing a very busy post-budget legislative session. Reporting at the Capitol, Nick Reisman, Time Warner Cable News.
Governor Cuomo is calling the education reforms in this year's budget one of the greatest legacies for him and for the state when all is said and done. Joining me now from the Capitol to talk more about this is Jim Malatras. He is Director of State Operations, and he was deeply involved in the negotiations over this budget, particularly the education piece. Thank you so much for being here, Jim. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too, Liz.
So the governor basically says this is going to transform the system. It's something that he said all along, really dating even back to before January during the re-election campaign, that he wanted to do. What is it specifically, the piece of this agreement that will in fact change the way public education runs in New York?
Well, first of all, today is a great day for students across the state of New York, Liz. The governor's agenda is not just one piece. It literally transforms the entire system